Welcome to the Pharmacist RN, a podcast made for pharmacists by pharmacists. Pull up a seat and let's get started.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Pharmacists Are In live stream. We are back, and we're back online. My name is Ajit Johal. I'm joined with my co-host, Dr. John Papastergiou, and we had a very busy morning, a lot of guests, a lot of great conversations, but we're now on the afternoon track, and we've got some incredible guest lines up, John.
Yeah, it's lunchtime now at the conference, so you can see the difference. Everyone's out of the session, so there's a lot of people here, man. And when you kind of take a step back and have a look, it really is now, I think, the premier conference, right? There's not much else going on. CPHA doesn't really have a conference anymore. OPA doesn't. So outside of FIP, which we could talk about later, coming to Canada, I think this is the place to be here, Vancouver, Montreal. Yeah,
definitely is. And right now we're joined by our Pharmacy keynote speaker, Danielle Paes. Danielle, welcome.
Thank
the Pharmacists
you.
Are In.
It's a joy to be here with both of you.
How was it this morning? I missed it.
It was awesome. It was early, but I was blown away at how many people were there and the energy right from the start of the day. You could feel it. It's always palpable here. Mm-hmm. There's an energy and a vibe when you come that you get to tap into, and you experience it right from the start. And I was happy to be a part of that.
Yeah, I was saying when I first got here today, I was at A4M in the States, way bigger conference, way bigger. But the vibe here is different. It's like, I think pharmacists, they're excited to get the chance to network, They haven't seen their colleagues. We all work in silos, so you get into an environment like this, it's pretty good. And I think guys at Pharmacy U have done a really good job.
Oh, it's been phenomenal. And I feel watching that evolution over the years. I was actually here as a pharmacy student 15 years ago. So even my relationship to what this conference has become has changed and shifted, but it's been a constant presence in my life, and arguably something I look forward to and will continue to look forward to every year.
So what was the keynote about? I should know, but I wasn't here.
Wow. Yeah. They gave me a pretty tall order. They asked me to look at the last 15 years of the profession and what.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. It's a lot.
But that's the beauty of it. There has been a lot. We have come a long way. And we looked at the scope chart from 2010. Yeah. A lot of red X's. We were not allowed to do anything. And I talked a little bit about my own journey over the last 15 years in my career and all of the cool things that first of all, I didn't know what a pharmacist did when I started pharmacy school. I thought I did. Mm-hmm. And then the exams came on and the modules and this overwhelming amount of information. And I was like, nobody knows how much you know. And I think that's where my passion started. And so I talked a little bit about my journey from realizing what an untapped, undervalued, underrecognized resource pharmacists were, and then getting on any soapbox that I could find and sharing that message. And so to see where we are today, 15 years later, it is a completely different world. The authority pharmacists have is unbelievable, especially not only the authority to use the knowledge and skills and expertise that we have, but the funding to back it up. It's not everywhere. But there is evidence to show what's possible, and it's an exciting time to be a pharmacist.
Well, we talk about it on the show all the time. I think Ajit and I get a chance to speak in other countries, and you see how pharmacists in other countries view Canada as like the gold standard, right? They're, Canadian pharmacists, especially in Alberta, the whole world knows about the scope, the pharmacy world knows about the scope that Alberta has. And I get asked questions about that all the time. And, you know, I was in Hong Kong, how do we get there? Like, their scope is very narrow still. You know, how do we move our profession forward? And it's something that's happening globally now, 4 million pharmacists. But the small group of us here in Canada are really kind of pushing the boundaries.
Absolutely. You know what? It's a rebrand. I touched a little bit about that in my keynote. We're rebranding pharmacists. If you think about when you look at movies or TV shows, the image of the pharmacist is man in white coat standing behind a wall of pills, pouring from one bottle to a big bottle to a small bottle. Standard.
Jerry Seinfeld.
Yeah, exactly.
Why does
Who
it
do I
take so
trust?
long?
Yep.
And that is not at all who we are or what we're about. And so how do you rebrand a profession? Part of that is to activate as a profession to change people's perception of who we are and coming out from behind the counter and engaging and showcasing our knowledge. And we have more opportunities to do that now than ever before. And I think it's working because pharmacists, especially, and you know, I also touched on the pandemic and how that was a turning point. We went from giving 0% of vaccinations in the country to being a primary source. Like, could you imagine that in 2010, you weren't allowed to get your flu shot at a pharmacy, or you couldn't get your flu shot at a pharmacy. Now it's just standard practice. So anyways, there's a bit of an evolution happening, and I really want to help people see themselves as part of that and what role that they play in our rebrand.
Yeah. Where do you see us going next? I think this is, I imagine the audience may have even asked you that. Like, you know, I see where we are here in Ontario now with scope, and it's very different than other parts of the country, but, you know, I'm not sure where we're going to end up next. I think the last few years we had a good idea, but I'm not sure where we're going, right?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a place for pharmacists in primary care. Absolutely. There's a spot of chronic disease management.
We talk about that
all the time.
All the time.
But you know, the other piece that I think is really exciting is that I think specialization is where it's going to go, because we all have different passions, different interests. We've all had different life experiences. You know, maybe you've experienced infertility. Maybe you know someone who's experiencing addiction. There are drivers within our lives that move us into action. And so I wonder if we could figure out what that is for us as an individual practitioner and pour ourselves, our knowledge, our skills into that area. The patient that's going to experience care from a pharmacist who cares about that particular topic is going to be unmatched. And so I wonder if there's an opportunity to specialize. You know, pharmacies have traditionally been very generic, but, you know, we talk about oncology, CDE. There's just so
Travel
much
medicine,
opportunity.
definitely.
Longevity is huge. I think, you know, I worry about retail pharmacy. The traditional retail model is changing. And you see, you just look down south, right, and what's going on there. And we're seeing direct-to-consumer, things like Trump RX. I think unless we evolve pretty quickly, I'm worried about kind of our economic model in retail pharmacy, right?
Well, one of the things, you missed it, but one of the things I touched on in the keynote is that I want to eliminate the word retail because I think it sends the wrong message. We're not the place where you go to buy products. We're a place where you go and receive care. So we are healthcare providers and we operate in healthcare hubs, but that's a change. You know, even calling it a store versus a pharmacy. That being said, I think that there's, again, like, you can't automate human connection. You can't automate relationships. And I think that's where our superpower is in how we allow people to, because getting the drug is one thing. That's fine. It's what do you do when that drug isn't working or creates a new issue for you, or, you know, that's where the conversation needs to go.
Yeah, and another key theme that I thought really resonated from your keynote, and it's kind of permeated through the DNA of this conference, because pharmacy is a living entity, right, is this idea of unity.
Yes.
And we were talking on an earlier episode, with Dawn and Yvonne, and actually just going to what you were saying about specialty is everyone has their niche, right? Their passion, their talent. I mean, for me personally, it was immunization, infectious disease, but for others, it could be specialty, autoimmune disease, diabetes, fertility. And I think we need to unify as a profession to kind of do some intra-referral, and just kind of recognize who's good at what, and, do share backs and support patients that way.
It's a great idea, and it's a start, but I don't think there's total agreement on where we should go. This is the problem, right? We don't even have agreement between the provinces, really, right? So we don't have harmonized scope. It's hard to kind of come up with a one-size-fits-all model. Funding's different and scope's different and everything else, right?
Yeah, it gets complicated, but I think there's something there. I think I worked in pediatrics for a chunk of my career. When I'm in a community pharmacy and a family comes in, this is my area. I light up. I know that it can be intimidating for some people, but for me, there's a special place in my heart for that. And so, as we continue to align our pharmacy practices with things that we genuinely enjoy and do it well, I think it'll speak for itself. And, I always say pharmacy advocacy happens at the counter, and you never know who you're going to care for that day. And so, when we think about the story of pharmacy and the experience of a patient, and how that translates into politics to change scope, to get us aligned, it comes from those lived experiences and the stories that are shared from person to person to person. And so if you are showing up in the best version of yourself every single day, you're gonna hit somebody in an influential role that is going to then be our voice at the tables that we're not at. And now that we have something to point to, I think we're going to get alignment. It's just going to take, what do we do in the interim?
Yeah, well, I think that's the question. We talk about it a lot on the show, and you even look at immunization kind of data between the different provinces, like RSV vaccination that's initiated by pharmacists in Ontario versus, say, Alberta, right? The rates are so much higher in Alberta because they have the scope, right? So how do we all get to that point? And I think when I think of Ontario, we've been waiting on, we thought chronic disease prescribing was coming. Minor ailments should have already expanded. Maybe 2 years we've been waiting for that. And it's this progression. How do we get there? And what do you do in the meantime, right? It's, it's something I struggle to have a conversation with the new grads because they come out prepared to do all this stuff. And then they get to practice and they're like, hold on. It's like we're tying their hands on one end, right?
Oh, yeah. And you lose motivation, right? Mm-hmm. And to have knowledge and then, if you don't use it, you lose it and then you lose confidence. And then it's unfortunate that there's such a delay. And so, and I think about the conferences like this, coming here and actually hearing from people who are doing it in different parts of the country and seeing what's possible, it holds you in that space of hope and possibility of what your practice might or could be like one day. And we're playing the long game here, but it's happening. And when I think about the expansion of scope in the last 5 years, I suspect in the next 2 or 3 we're gonna see all of those blue check marks.
I use that. It's funny that CPHA graph. I use it all the time. Do you know the one we're talking about, Ajit, with all the X's?
I do know what.
Every talk I start with that. In 2002 when I graduated, it was all X's, like the whole thing. And you look at it now, it's pretty impressive, coast to coast, right? It's just how do we keep pushing that? Getting to a point where we're all practicing at least to the same level.
Yeah, I think there's a really good quote. I don't know who said it, but it's like Rome wasn't built in a day, but every day they were laying bricks. Yeah, deep, right? Very. And I think it resonates what you said, Danielle, about just advocacy happens day to day, right? So every day you're using the scope you have patients as your advocates, and we're made a lot of progress in the past 15 years, and obviously it's going to happen a lot faster, like it did the past 2 years versus the previous 2 years. So a lot of great things on the horizon pharmacy.
Yeah, so for one of the reasons we wanted to do the podcast from here was open up the idea of the conference to maybe pharmacists that can't come, haven't come to a conference. Community pharmacists, a lot of them don't attend conferences. I mean, the audiences a lot of times are the same people, right? So, if you have the opportunity to address that group and think of, okay, what's the value of Pharmacy U? What does it mean to you? What do you think it would mean to them potentially? What are a couple of pearls that you would say, hey, try to convince the people that aren't coming out to come out? What would your message be?
You know what? I mean, I'm a big fan of personal reflection. I think you as an individual need to think about, okay, so one of the stats, sorry, I'm interrupting myself here. One of the stats that I shared in my keynote is that the ROI on a pharmacy degree is 114%. That was a new analysis that came out of the States. And just to put it into perspective, the average ROI for a postgraduate degree is 17. So you have a degree that is incredibly valuable. What are you doing with it? And the way to think about, so I'm a big believer in alignment. You need to be aligned. Use your education, your life experience, and your passion, and it's a recipe for success. I think this conference gives you a window into inspiring people who have found that alignment and are living and breathing it. And when you talk to them, I'm like, how's it going? And they're like, I love my job. It's so much fun. I'm doing all sorts of creative things, and it's contagious. And so if you are listening to this and you're at home and you're sitting on the fence, you will not regret coming here. And I guarantee you will build a connection with someone. You'll build a network, and we can lean on each other. You talk about unity. There's a sense of unity here that's, you can't even put it into words. You just have to experience it.
Yeah, I remember I'm trying to think what my first conference was that I ever went to. I mean, because I was in the Shoppers Drug Mart world. We had the Shoppers Drug Mart conferences, but I wasn't early in my career very active. And then I think it was CPHA. It was one of the CPHA ones, either in Toronto or in Ottawa or something. And it just opened your eyes to everything that was going on across the country at that time. It was pretty exciting, and you're like, and you almost get the bug for it after, and you want to go to more. And especially for those listeners that are early on in their careers, I think the ability to network is priceless, right?
It really makes a difference. Those early years when you start, if you can find something you're passionate about, I know for me, it was immunizations, and I started that right when I graduated in 2012. And Danielle, it resonates so much with me about this community you get at conferences like this. You share ideas, you hear what others are doing, but you're not in it alone, right?
Yeah.
So that's the vibe, right?
Yeah.
And then also you kind of listen for opportunities for other people, right? So Ajit, I know that you are interested in immunizations. And so when someone approaches me and talks about it, I'm like, I'm not your person, but you know what? I know someone that is. And so we kind of do this looking after each other thing. And the more that you share, the one thing that I will say is pharmacists don't like to talk about what they do and who they are. I think we've always been, I don't know, maybe it's the way we're trained. We're sort of behind the scenes. But I think the more comfortable we get with sharing what it is about us, our practice, the things that light us up, the more that you're planting seeds of possibility for you. You don't know what doors are going to open and who you're going to run into at this conference that's going to change the trajectory of your career.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense to me, because I've actually lived it, mentors that you make across, along the way. I remember meeting at the conferences. I mean, I knew the people from the Faculty of Pharmacy at U of T, but as a colleague, I started to interact with them at the conferences, right? And it was very important to me.
Well, it was, but I'd also say, John, we've talked about this before, you've actually paved the way for future generations for conference presentations, peer-to-peer learning with pharmacists, because traditionally that was done by doctors, right, who had no understanding of pharmacy workflow. And there's been a huge paradigm shift with that.
I tell this story sometimes, but I remember because students will ask me, well, I want to speak at conferences. I want to go, how do you do that? I go, well, it doesn't start you don't get to do a keynote at some conference in Europe your first day, right? You've got to start small. And I still remember it was, back then I was doing some pilot stuff or whatever, and someone from Bayer that still had a diabetes division then, invited me to give a talk in a restaurant, but it wasn't even, it was like at a table. It was just no screen, right? That was the first talk I ever gave. I think I got paid $200 to do it, but the audience, there was like 7 people there. They liked it, and it just set the stage for, hey, maybe we'll use them to do another one and another one. And at that time, you're really right. It was all physicians that were doing all the talks, and I kept pushing pharma, saying, they don't understand what we do, right? So it's nice from a therapeutic perspective, but they're not going to resonate with the pharmacists. Like, there's nothing there that's going to change their practice, that they can't just pick up a book and read or whatever, right? So I think it's nice that you say that, but hopefully, and I think there's a lot of us that are doing it now, but you see, even at a conference like this, it's all pharmacists now that are speaking, which is great, right?
Which is great. It's that peer-to-peer learning that inspires others, right? It's not only that's great information, but that's a great story, and that could be me.
Yeah, then that's it. It's the representation. It's planting the seeds of possibility, because when you are learning from a peer, there's a sense of unity, and you see yourselves in them. They're speaking your language. They're saying things that you can relate to in a way that resonates. And when that happens, you start to wonder, I wonder if I could do that, or who, and it starts.
What do you say to the pharmacists that, I still get this, like, I'm still filling scripts. I've got minor ailments. I've got immunizations. Like, I can't fit in it, right? It's just too much. And I think there is the reality. There's a lot of pharmacists are facing that as well. They're like at that brink of burnout, right? And it's not that the managers don't want to put on staff. They just can't find enough people to work, right? So I think this is something as a profession we have to tackle, because you see the stress on the staff all the time, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a mindset thing. And that's actually why I'm studying to become a coach. I think coaching, leadership, mindset are critical tools that we don't, you can learn the technical knowledge and the clinical knowledge at school, but it's the other qualities, some of those other skills, life skills, that are going to help you. I always say life is going to life. Yeah. You can't control that. All you can control is your ability to move through it and respond versus react. And so, I think your relationship to your work has to do with setting boundaries, knowing who you are, knowing what your capacity is, and learning how to say no, which is hard because we aren't trained to say no.
Michael Bovin gave me the best advice of my life. I don't even think he knows this. I should probably tell him. This was years ago. We were at some conference, and back then, people will come at you with everything. Once you start doing stuff, they'll ask, could you speak here? Could you do this? And you're pretty honored. Okay, I'll do it, right? But then you're kind of becoming a jack of a million different trades. You can't be an expert on anything. And he pulled me aside and he said, John, I'll give you some advice, he said. And it was relatively early in my career. And he said, either do something that you love, do it because they're paying you enough for it, or don't do it because you're going to burn out. Or the audience will get sick of you because you're giving all these, talking about a million different things. You can't be that expert on everything, right? And it was very good advice. And I think it helped to kind of shape where I went with my career, definitely.
Well, that's it. It's your mental health and well-being, right? So I'm working with the Mental Wealth Academy specifically to help keep healthcare professionals here, because they're all leaving. There's some brilliant minds. You go to school for 6 years, you invest in a degree, and then you change professions. If there's a way for us to create a workforce of happy, healthy pharmacy professionals in thriving community pharmacies, and I'm saying community, but it really could be hospital, whatever setting that is, I think it starts with just making sure that whatever you're doing it with intention. You're not doing it for the sake of doing it, and be really clear on what your goals are. We talk about organizational strategic plan. What's your strategic plan? What do you want for your life? Where do you see yourself? And when you start making decisions that go through that filter, it starts to become more and more clear. And then the path becomes easier and less daunting, and the burnout is not an option because you have strategically chosen your yeses, right?
So it's a super valid point. I mean, I've seen pharmacists, great pharmacists. I mean, we were talking about Brian Gray, and he won't mind me, talking about this. That he was in a rural area in Thunder Bay. couldn't find a pharmacist to work at all ever. So he was working morning till night, multiple pharmacies, and he was, sky was the limit for him, but he just said, I can't do this long term. And he kind of just broke out. He still owns the pharmacies, but kind of moved away from the day to day. And it was because of that, that inability to kind of practice the way he wanted, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I think this is where we need to come together as a profession and things like this. Having conversations like this. We touched on a lot here. There's a lot of raw content to unpack, and we're not going to solve it overnight, but by continuing to, it's all about perspective, right? You add your perspective, it's the diversity of thought that's going to get us to a solution, or even the next step. We take one step at a time, and hopefully 25 years. I don't know if you guys are still gonna be retired or not.
I'll be retired. And Jim might still be around. He's younger.
But we'll be having a completely different conversation.
When you said that, CPHA used to have the Leadership Summit, or was called something. That was pretty good. Yeah. What happened to that?
We need to do it again.
Yeah.
We need to, I think that we're at a point now where we're craving it.
Yeah.
We need to bring thought leaders together. So, hey, Pharmacy, if you're listening.
Yeah. And Pharma's around. They can sponsor that, I'm sure. But it was cool. It was really, I remember I went to the first couple, and they were, I thought, amazing, because you were hearing about what was going on in different provinces and strategies that they used. I mean, I'd even like to know, these pharmacist-directed clinics, the programs out of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, what happened there? I know New Brunswick, ultimately the funding didn't go forward, but the story there, I'm sure, is important for us all to learn, right?
Absolutely. And I think what's really cool about what's happening in Nova Scotia is they're aligned in terms of the regulator, the provincial association, the university. They're speaking the same language, and so the message is amplified. And so I think the traction comes from those strong relationships, the collaboration, the trust, and everybody's swimming in their own lane, but you're all singing from the same songbook. And so it's really hard to argue with a message that is universal across the board and is so strong. So of course the governments are listening.
It's awesome. I mean, you should come on more often. This
is great. Yeah. No, we appreciate you coming on, Danielle. And again, amazing keynote address. Very well suited to the 15 years of pharmacy, nostalgia, and what's to be expected moving forward. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And thanks for doing this. This is incredible. Kudos to both of you for the light you're adding to our profession.
Thanks. Awesome.
Thank you so much.